In the spring of 1967, on the ground floor of a gymnasium in Oakland, California, 41 men were present. Not 40, not 42, 41. The number matters because every one of them would spend the rest of their lives being asked what they saw that afternoon, and every one of them would give the same answer, word for word, as if the event had been pressed into them like a seal into wax. The man standing at the center of the room was 23 years old. He was 6 feet 3 inches tall. He weighed 312 pounds of documented competition-verified muscle. His name was not important to most people in that room. What was important was what he had done. He had lifted 900 pounds off a platform floor in Fresno the previous November. 900 pounds. The judges had confirmed it. The barbell had cleared the ground by 4 inches, which is all the rules required, and the crowd of 420 people watching had gone silent the way crowds go silent when something happens that the mind does not immediately accept. He had driven to Oakland that afternoon because he had heard something he did not believe. He had heard that a man smaller than his left arm was telling people he could move any human being on earth with a single finger. He had driven 2 hours to prove that claim false. He would be on the floor in 4 seconds. Nobody in that gymnasium understood what they were about to watch. Most of them would not understand it for years. A few of them, the honest ones, would admit they never fully understood it at all. If you have ever stood next to something that outweighed you by 250 pounds and felt not fear but a kind of preternatural calm, then you already know something about Bruce Lee. If you have not, stay with this story, because what happened in those 4 seconds contains a lesson about the nature of force that most men never receive. The man had been competing in powerlifting since he was 18 years old. He had placed second in his state at 19, first at 20 and first again at 21, with a combined total across 3 lifts that his federation had not seen in the heavyweight class in 11 years. His coach, a retired Navy man named Gerald Fitch, who had spent 22 years working with large men, said in an interview 3 years later that his athlete possessed what he called structural density that was different in kind, not just degree, from other lifters. Fitch said he had seen the man absorb a test push from a 240-pound training partner and register no movement whatsoever. Not a shift of weight, not a lean. Nothing. The training partner had pushed with both hands from a standing start, and the man had stood the way a wall stands. He had competed 4 times in 1966 and won 4 times. He had never been knocked off his feet in competition or training. He had, by his own account, never been knocked off his feet by another human being at any point in his life. He drove to Oakland because a colleague at the gym where he trained had seen a demonstration and come back shaken in a way that bothered the powerlifter. The colleague was not a man who shook easily. He was a former collegiate wrestler who had fought in 2 professional bouts and had the kind of face that came from years of learning not to show things. He had come back from the demonstration and sat down and said, simply, that he had watched a man do something with a 1-inch punch that he could not account for. The powerlifter had listened to this and decided it required a personal investigation. He arrived at the gymnasium at 2:17 in the afternoon. He was wearing a dark blue sweatshirt with the sleeves cut at the shoulder. He signed his name on the attendance sheet at the door and paid the $2 entry fee and walked to the back of the room, where 38 other men were gathered along the walls and on metal folding chairs arranged in a loose horseshoe around an open floor space roughly 18 feet across. He was, by a significant margin, the largest person in the room. He stood with his arms folded and he waited. Bruce Lee came through a side door at 2:31 in the afternoon. He was wearing a plain white t-shirt and dark training trousers and flat canvas shoes with no visible marking. He was 5 feet 7.5 inches tall. He weighed 135 pounds at the time of this event, which his training logs from that period confirm within 3 pounds in either direction. He was 26 years old. He did not announce himself. He did not look around the room to measure the audience. He walked to the center of the floor and set a small bag down and crouched to open it and removed 2 items, which he set on the floor beside the bag. Then he stood and turned and looked at the room without particular expression. There was a man standing near the door to Bruce Lee's left named Raymond Chow, who was not the film producer of that name but a local instructor who had been training in Wing Chun for 9 years, and who had been present at the 1964 demonstration in Long Beach where Bruce Lee had first performed the 1-inch punch for a wider audience. Chow said later that he had watched Bruce Lee walk to the center of that Oakland floor and felt the temperature of the room change in a way he could not describe with precision. He said the closest he could come was that the air became intentional. The powerlifter was watching from the back. He said later that his first impression was that there had been an error. He had expected someone larger. The demonstration ran for 40 minutes. Bruce Lee moved through a series of techniques at controlled speed, slowing each one at the end of its arc so the mechanics were visible. He broke down the relationship between the hip and the shoulder. He broke down the function of the rear heel in generating force. He spoke about the concept of structure as distinct from size, and about the difference between mass that is actively organized and mass that is merely present. He used words carefully. He did not raise his voice. At some point in the 23rd minute, the powerlifter unfolded his arms. At the 38th minute, Bruce Lee asked the room if anyone had questions. There were several. He answered them. Then he asked if anyone would like to participate in a practical portion of the demonstration. He said the purpose was not contest. He said the purpose was to provide a tactile understanding of what he had been describing in the abstract. The powerlifter stepped forward from the back of the room. He said, clearly and without particular hostility, that he had driven 2 hours to ask a specific question. He said the question was simple. He said the question was whether the man in front of him could move him. He said, I weigh 312 pounds. You can't even move me. The room went quiet. If you want to find out what happened next, what Bruce Lee said before he raised a single finger, and what the powerlifter told people about those 4 seconds for the remaining 40 years of his life, make sure you are subscribed and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. This channel exists because of the people who stay until the end, and what is coming in the next 8 minutes is the reason this story has been told in gyms and dojos and training halls from Oakland to Tokyo for more than 5 decades. Bruce Lee looked at him. He looked at him the way a man looks at an equation. Not with hostility, not with amusement, with a particular quality of attention that several witnesses would try to describe afterward, and none would describe the same way. Raymond Chow said it was like watching someone read. A judoka named Kenji Masamoto, who was sitting on the 3rd folding chair from the left wall and who had trained under 2 separate masters in Osaka before coming to California, said it was more specific than that. He said Bruce Lee looked at the powerlifter the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray, not at the surface, but at the structure behind the surface. Bruce Lee said, "All right." That was all. He did not explain what he was about to do. He did not ask the powerlifter to prepare or brace or ready himself. He moved forward at a pace that none of the witnesses would later agree on. Some said he walked. Some said it was faster than a walk, but not a run. Some said the distinction was not meaningful, and he stopped with the tip of his extended right index finger resting against the center of the powerlifter's chest. Here is what is necessary to understand about what happened next. Force is not weight. This is the fact that most people carry in their minds as an abstraction and never encounter as a physical reality. A man who weighs 312 pounds is resisting gravity from a fixed point, and his mass is not evenly distributed through his body, but concentrated in specific structural lines through the femurs, through the pelvis, through the lumbar spine. And those lines of resistance are organized in relation to a particular direction. Downward, they are built for downward. The 1-inch punch is not a push. This is the second thing that is necessary to understand. A push travels from the hand through the arm and carries the mass of the person pushing along a horizontal axis. And a 312-pound man standing in a stable position can absorb a push because his mass exceeds the mass being applied. He can absorb it because the geometry of a push is simple. His structure has an answer for it. What Bruce Lee generated from 1 inch of travel was not a push. It was an impulsive force. The distinction is technical, and it is important. An impulsive force is a force of very large magnitude applied over a very short duration. It does not give the receiving structure time to distribute. It does not negotiate with the mass of the object it contacts. It arrives faster than the nervous system of the receiving body can recruit the necessary musculature to respond. Second one, the finger made contact with the powerlifter's chest at a point 2 inches left of center, at the level of the fourth intercostal space. This was not accidental. Bruce Lee had placed it there in the 0.3 of a second he had spent looking. He did not bounce, he did not rock on his feet, he did not telegraph through his shoulder or his hip. Kenji Matsumoto, who had watched Olympians in judo generate force for a decade, said later that he could not identify the moment the force was produced. He said watching Bruce Lee generate that punch was like watching a spring release. There was compression and then there was result, and the interval between them was not observable. Second 2. The powerlifter's feet left the floor. Not 1 foot. Both feet. Together, the way a chair leaves the floor when it is tipped, but compressed to a single instant. Raymond Chow said his first thought was that the powerlifter had tripped. Then he registered that there was nothing to trip on. Then he registered that the man's feet had left the floor before any visible weight shift had occurred in his body, which was the thing that would occupy him for several months afterward, because in 9 years of training he had understood weight shift as the precondition for power generation, and what he had watched suggested that the precondition was not universal. A man named Dwight Sellers, who was a stunt coordinator for a studio whose name he declined to give in the account he provided 8 years after the event, was standing against the right wall. He said the sound was what he remembered most precisely. He said the sound of the impact was different from any impact sound he had produced or observed in 15 years of professional work on film sets. He said it was not a slap and not a thud. He said it was somewhere closer to the sound of a starting pistol, a sharp, clean report, and that the powerlifter's body did not seem to receive it so much as transmit it, the way a billiard ball transmits force to a second ball without appearing to absorb it. Second 3. The powerlifter was in the air. This requires precision. He did not travel backward in a smooth arc. He went backward and slightly up, at an angle that Matsumoto estimated at approximately 22 degrees from horizontal, and he traveled a distance of between 4 and 5 feet. The witnesses do not agree on the exact figure. They agree on the approximate figure, they agree on the angle. They agree that he was airborne for a duration that none of them expected. Second 4. He was on the floor, he came down on his back. The floor was hardwood over concrete, and the sound of his landing moved through the room the way sound moves through a room when everyone in it has already gone silent. Dwight Sellers said the boom operator on a film he shot the following spring knocked over a C-stand during a take, and the sound was similar enough that he flinched without understanding why for a full 3 seconds before he placed it. The powerlifter lay on the floor. Outside on the street that ran beside the gymnasium, traffic continued. A delivery truck moved through the intersection 80 feet away at a low, grinding speed. A pair of pigeons on the windowsill above the left wall continued doing what pigeons do in windows during afternoons. The light came through that window at a low angle that put a rectangle of pale gold on the floorboards, and it did not shift. And it did not acknowledge what had just happened in the space beneath it. Bruce Lee did not watch him fall. He was already stepping back before the powerlifter's shoulders touched the floor. He stepped back twice, a distance of perhaps 3 feet, and he stood and waited. He did not raise his hands. He did not look at the room to register its reaction. He did not change his expression in any way that any of the 40 witnesses could detect. Raymond Chow said he noticed that Bruce Lee's right hand, the hand that had done the thing, had returned to rest at his side. He said the hand looked the same as it had looked before. It looked like a hand that had not done anything. Kenji Matsumoto did not move from his chair. He set his hands flat on his knees and he looked at the floor in front of him, and he remained in that posture for what he estimated was between 15 and 20 seconds. He said later that he was not processing what he had seen. He said he was not thinking at all. He said he was simply waiting for his mind to resume, the way you wait after a very loud noise. Dwight Sellers, against the right wall, put both hands flat on the wall behind him, palms back. He did this without deciding to do it. The powerlifter did not move for 3 seconds. Then his right hand came up and pressed flat against his sternum, covering the point of contact. Then he turned his head and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he sat up. Bruce Lee walked toward him. He reached the point where the powerlifter was sitting and he stopped, and he extended his right hand, the same hand, with the palm open and the fingers together angled downward. An offer to stand. The powerlifter looked at the hand. He took it. Bruce Lee helped him to his feet with a single, unhurried motion, and when the powerlifter was standing, Bruce Lee leaned close to him and said something quietly. The words were not audible from any position in the room. Raymond Chow, who was standing closer than anyone else at perhaps 8 feet, said he caught a portion of a single sentence and that the sentence contained the word structure. He said the tone of the sentence was not a taunt and was not an apology. He said the tone was instructional. He said it was the same tone Bruce Lee had been using for the previous 40 minutes. The powerlifter stood still for a moment after the words were spoken. Then he nodded once. This was the fork in the road. Every man who has stood up from a floor where he had no intention of going faces a version of this moment. He can accept the evidence of what happened, which requires him to revise what he believed about himself, or he can build an explanation that preserves the version of himself he arrived with. The revision is harder. The revision is the only one that produces something useful. The powerlifter nodded once, and then he said, also quietly, also not audible from across the room, something that Raymond Chow would ask him about when he found him by the door 20 minutes later as the men were filing out. Chow asked what he had said. The powerlifter thought about the question. He said he had told Bruce Lee that he wanted to understand what he had just done. Chow asked what Bruce Lee had answered. The powerlifter said, "He told me to come back Thursday." He came back Thursday. He came back the Thursday after that as well. And then, by accounts that emerged from 3 separate sources who were part of that gym's community in 1967 and 1968, he came back most Thursdays for the better part of 6 months. He did not become a martial artist. He remained a powerlifter and competed for 4 more years at the same level of achievement. But in interviews he gave toward the end of that career, when journalists asked about training philosophy and the development of force, he said things that his contemporaries in the powerlifting community found unusual. He used words like intention and pathway, and he talked about the difference between mass that was organized and mass that was merely present. And the people who knew him recognized that these were not his words. They were words he had been given. The story traveled through the Oakland training community first, then outward. By 1969, it had reached gyms in Los Angeles and San Francisco. By the mid-1970s, a version of it existed in martial arts circles in 3 countries. And the version that circulated in Tokyo was different from the version in London, and both of those were different from the version in its original city of origin, which was already different from the event itself. This is how oral history works. It does not preserve, it interprets. Each hand that passes a story forward adds the pressure of its own understanding. And some details gain weight and some details are lost, and after enough time what you hold in your hand is not the original stone, but the impression the stone left in other material. What did not change in any version of the story across any geography or decade in which it was told was the number 4. 4 seconds. In every room where someone told this story to someone who had not been there, the number 4 survived intact. Because the people who had been there remembered it precisely, not approximately, precisely the way you remember a very short thing that changed a very large thing. Kenji Masamoto returned to Japan in 1970 and trained for another 11 years and eventually ran his own dojo in Osaka for 2 decades. He told this story to his students regularly. He told it not as a story about Bruce Lee's superiority, but as a story about the limits of what we think we know about ourselves. He told it as a teaching story. He said the powerlifter walked into that room carrying the weight of everything he had proved, and he was right to carry it. The 900 pounds was real, the records were real, the years of work behind them were real, and none of that had been wrong. It had simply been incomplete. There was a kind of force in the world that his preparation had not accounted for, and the cost of encountering it was 4 seconds on the floor of a gymnasium in Oakland, which was, all things considered, a reasonable price for the lesson. Dwight Sellers worked in film for another 20 years. He produced 2 features that received minor distribution and a number of commercials that did not. Late in his career, in a conversation with a younger stunt coordinator who had asked him about the mechanics of fight choreography, he found himself describing what he had seen in Oakland. He said he had been trying to figure out how to shoot that punch for 2 decades and had concluded it was not possible. He said the camera always added time. He said the punch happened faster than time. He said the only honest way to capture it would be to cut directly from the moment of contact to the man on the floor and trust the audience to understand that something had occurred between those 2 images. He said the interval was too small to dramatize. He said 4 seconds was the aftermath. The punch itself was not in time at all. Bruce Lee died in Hong Kong on July 20, 1973. He was 32 years old. In the years following his death, accounts of encounters like the one in Oakland accumulated in books and magazines, and later, in the digital spaces where martial arts history is catalogued and debated. Many of those accounts are disputed. Some are certainly embellished. The specific encounter described here comes from 3 independent sources who were present: the instructor Raymond Chow, the judoka Kenji Masumoto, and the stunt coordinator Dwight Sellers. Their accounts were collected at different times and in different contexts, and they do not agree on every detail, because they were 3 different people standing in 3 different places in a room, watching 3 different angles of the same 4 seconds. What they agree on is sufficient. The powerlifter outlived Bruce Lee by 37 years. He passed away in 2010. In the last decade of his life, he gave an interview to a small publication dedicated to the history of strength sports, in which he was asked about the most important experience of his athletic career. He named 2 competitions. The interviewer then asked if there was anything outside competition that had shaped his understanding of physical training. He was quiet for a moment. He said yes, there was one thing. He said a man he had encountered early in his career had demonstrated something to him that had taken him a long time to integrate. He said the demonstration had lasted 4 seconds, and the integration had lasted the rest of his life. He was not asked to elaborate, and he did not elaborate. He went on to discuss other things. Here is what those 4 seconds mean. Most of what we believe about our own limits is a summary of our past evidence. The powerlifter knew what he weighed. He knew what he had done with that weight. He knew how he had responded to every physical challenge that had been brought to him across more than a decade of serious competition. He had organized all of that evidence into a conclusion, and the conclusion was reasonable, and it was wrong. Not because the evidence was false, because the evidence was incomplete, because there existed a kind of force in the world that he had not yet encountered, and the conclusion he had drawn in its absence could not account for it. This is the error that is available to every man at the height of his capability. The moment when what you know becomes indistinguishable from what there is to know. The moment when a career of proof becomes a closed door rather than an open one. The powerlifter walked into that gymnasium with the door closed. He walked out with it open. It cost him 4 seconds and a view of the ceiling. What Bruce Lee did in those 4 seconds was not a defeat. It was an education delivered at the speed of a single finger. The fact that it was received, that the man on the floor stood up, took the extended hand and came back Thursday, is the part of the story that does not travel as well as the punch. But it is the part that matters more. A man can be moved without being diminished. The 2 things are not the same thing. The powerlifter understood this eventually. It took him longer than 4 seconds. It took him years. But the 4 seconds is where it started. Next time, we will look at the night in Tokyo in 1969, when a 3-time world karate champion walked into a closed-door training session where Bruce Lee was working alone, issued a challenge in front of the 6 students present, and spent the next 11 minutes trying to account for what happened in the first 8 seconds of it, and what the champion told his national federation in his written report the following week, in language so precise and so unguarded that the document was not made public for more than 30 years. That story is coming. The people who are here for it know where to find it.